If you have relationship problems, you have an insecure attachment problem, and you are definitely going to want to watch this video. So in an insecure relationship, you have two people with insecurities, childhood trauma that they may or may not be aware of. These are their emotional wounds that they got from their parents, either based on what they observed in their family or what was done to them. Both of their childhoods consisted of some form of abuse, neglect, or abandonment, and oftentimes a combination of all of them. And so when they come together, they recreate what is familiar to them in terms of personality traits and coping behaviors. So the childhood of this person learned to suppress and repress his emotions. He got the message that being emotional, expressing needs, being vulnerable was not okay. He might also later learn to become a pleaser, codependent. He is probably often referred to as the quiet child. On the other hand, his partner might have learned to project a lot of emotion, maybe getting angry, emotional, aggressive, easy to cry. And this person also learned to become controlling later on, also known as the loud child. And between the two of them, this can later develop as an avoidant attachment or anxious attachment, or codependent and narcissist. Either way, these behavior patterns are learned from childhood, and then they come together. All they are really doing is recreating their childhood. So much so that, depending on who they are the most wounded by, perhaps the mother in this case, in fact, the recreation of the childhood can be so strong that she might remind him of his mother, and he will remind her of her father. It's typically the person that you had the most wounds with is who you will match up with later on in life. You can also flip between partners. One reminds you of your father, the other reminds you of your mother. This happens very often as well. Switch between both of them because you have wounds with both parents. And so this is what their fights look like. It's called the infinite loop of doom. Let's say one person gets triggered. Usually one person gets triggered first, whether it's with work or the partner triggers them. Let's say it's him. He gets triggered with work. Maybe he's failing at work for some reason or gets some kind of stress. Fear comes on. He feels unworthy, a failure. Whatever that trigger is, it causes him to do a coping behavior. So he learns to cope with those triggers based off his childhood, what he learned from his childhood. And so that coping might be shutting down, isolating, distracting himself, playing video games, sports, entertainment, other friends, some way to distract, to shut down, to disconnect, to just basically cope with this pain right here, right? This emotional pain right here. So when he does this to try to soothe himself, which is instinctual, automatic, all it does instead is it triggers the hell out of his partner right here. Boom, big trigger right there. And so now she is left feeling alone, unseen, unheard, neglected. She is wanting attention from him and he is in his coping, so she's getting triggered. So to deal with that trigger, she's going to also do coping behaviors based off of what she learned from her childhood. What is that going to look like? It might be start complaining, yelling, criticizing, getting really intense, emotional, aggressive, and that is going to be very uncomfortable to him. That is actually going to trigger him even more. He's going to feel even more unworthy. He's going to feel more unsafe, and he's going to try to pull back, and he's going to do more of his coping. And guess what? That puts him right back into the cycle. She's triggered again, tries to cope with that, and they are just triggering each other more. It's literally an infinite loop of doom. It can get very, very intense until it ends up in a huge, massive fight, which they don't know how to do anything about that. And then they sweep it under the rug. They just try to move on until the next trigger. And then the fighting happens again. And if this happens enough times, then they will eventually break up or get divorced. And whether or not they stick through it or jump into another relationship, what will happen is if they don't heal the root cause of their triggers, which are their childhood wounding, the abuse, the neglect, the abandonment, and so on, probably more wounds here, then they will create what's called generational trauma. They are already a victim of generational trauma, but they will continue it. So here's him and her again. If they have kids, that child will learn to adopt the wounds and unfinished business from their parents, and they will link up with another wounded counterpart to recreate the trauma again. And if they have kids, it will continue once again. This is generational trauma. This is how we got our trauma. And this is how we give trauma to our future generations and the people around us. It just continues and continues and continues all the way down the family tree. And it is a vicious cycle that you now have the power to get out of. But it's going to take a lot of deep healing and accountability to stop doing the coping behaviors. You have to really stop doing the coping behaviors and do the trauma healing process. So if you want your current or future relationships to change, you have to change. And that change is the deep-rooted healing, reprocessing the childhood traumas that you may or may not know are there, but they are definitely controlling you from the subconscious. If you want to work with me, visit my profile link and definitely follow me for more content.